Well, first of all, given that it's like 8:30, I'd like to thank you all for showing up. I mean, this is kind of late in the evening for most of us. So this is the SIG Apps deep dive. I'm looking around, I see a lot of you guys and know most of you. Some of you are new faces. So just out of curiosity, how many people know what SIG Apps is? Okay, so mostly this side of the room. All right, so for you guys, SIG Apps is kind of, on one side, it's kind of a landing page for Kubernetes. It's kind of eclectic. It's designed for people who are developers of Kubernetes, people who develop things that are in the ecosystem like Helm, Draft, Compose, and for people who work on the core Workloads Api. So that's deployment, stateful set, replica set, replication controller, which hopefully nobody in the room is still using in production. Oh, no. But that's pretty much who we are. And we kind of gear toward participation from all different segments of the community. So people who are developers, people who are operators, people who are contributors. Now, if everybody read the description of this session, it's really meant to be a working session. So this is, your SIG, the session's for you. So the topics that we want to come together and talk about are topics that we're going to decide in the room right now. And if there are no suggestions, well, I've got a few in my back pocket that we can just bring up. And then the other thing is, we were planning to actually split up and do discussions in kind of small groups, but that was when we were looking at the participation and it was at like 178. We're a much smaller size than that, so do we, like by show of hands, do we want to split up into small groups and talk about particular subjects, or do we just want to kind of talk about subjects as a room? So hand up if you would like to break up into small groups. And you're by yourself, sir. So, okay, I guess we'll talk about all the topics as a room. So that brings us to the next thing. Interesting. But I should be mirrored. I can look out the corner of my eye. Okay, so things to talk about. So what do you guys actually want to discuss? Does anybody have anything in particular? Nope. Okay.
Newbie question. What is an application?
That is actually a topic for conversation. Future directions of the Workloads API. There we go. Oh. All right, anybody up for Helm 3?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Other stuff. App CRD, which is kind of what is an application. Developer tooling?
Scaffold? Yeah.
That would be scaffold, yeah.
Multi-cluster deployments?
Okay. DevOps. Official applications? So we could probably take app CRD, what is an application, and official applications, and we can just roll that all up into applications. Okay, so if we go with this set, and we do 10 minutes a topic, that's pretty much going to be all time. So do we want to suggest a few more things and then decide what we want to talk about, or do you want to kind of adopt this as what we want to talk about? So we can talk about service message, and Janet could probably speak fairly intelligently on that. Is everyone else in the room? Well, yeah, let's put it up there. Right? We can go with that and see where that takes us. Anything else? Okay. So in terms of where we start, I guess we can start with applications. So what was the first kind of thing? What is an application on Kubernetes? I mean, that's a pretty good question. I don't think there's actually an official definition of that right now. And kind of if you install something that's an app in Kubernetes, what you really get is a loosely coupled group of network primitives like services, maybe some workloads controllers like stateful sets and deployments, and ultimately a bunch of pods. Then some storage primitives, PVCs, PVs that kind of loop together to form what an application is. And I guess traditionally we think of an application that provides something that provides value to an end user or a service to maybe another service if you have a microservices architecture. So let me ask, does anybody have any thoughts on what an application is?
Maybe we can also not say application, but packages. I kind of like the framing of industry. Say that
Okay.
it's a Helm package, and so it's a package in the sense of a Debian package or Red Hat package. And then it means that it has dependencies, and it can be dependent on the other service on the other around, and so
So that's kind of another, well, I was thinking more in terms of a running application, and you're talking about an application in terms of package management and dependency management, right? So this is like, I'm talking about running state, you're talking about distribution state.
then you run it.
Well, then you run it, right? But that sort of manifests that distribution, it's very different characteristics, and there's a very different set of concerns around it than when you're actually running the application, right? On one side, you're concerned with telemetry, coordinates, ensuring that the application is up and looking at the performance of the application. With package management, you're ensuring that dependencies are met and that you actually installed what you think you've installed, and generally, hopefully, that the process of installing that application is repeatable across multiple different environments. So, I mean, we can take the conversation either direction. Which one do we want to talk about?
Is it about third-party applications, or off-the-shelf applications or bespoke applications?
I mean, so for most organizations, at least from my experience, both are relevant, right? Like, I'm not going to probably, well, most people probably aren't going to roll a bespoke database and deploy that on top of Kubernetes in a production environment. They'll install a package like maybe Helm MySQL or Helm Postgres to get the DB. But data storage by itself doesn't really provide much value to most customers, right? So there's going to be something bespoke, and then most people have some need within their organization to be able to distribute that bespoke application to other teams, to version it, and potentially to deploy it into multiple environments and integrate it with CI/CD.
Again, bespoke, that when you box it and distribute to other teams, that already makes it off-the-shelf application. So
It depends on how you define off the shelf, right? Like,
the stuff that I see the most, when a team builds an application, they also run it and make sure that it's available on the well-known URL. So it's like a contract between the people who build something and between people who use it. And it's basically the URL. Or if it's a background job, then it's the side effects of that job that is observable. So it's not about the technical implementation of that contract, it's the contract itself.
so, okay, let's concede that point and then define what a bespoke application is. So once I package it, it's no longer bespoke, then what do you mean by bespoke?
I mean, something that you build inside in-house. Like something proprietary that you build, just a microservice that works, several microservices work together as a platform, I don't know, an internet shop, online shop.
So I guess my kind of thought was that so let's say I'm using Helm to deploy applications into Kubernetes, and I'm using it to deploy packaged applications that I get from another source, right? How am I getting the bespoke applications that are developed internally into the cluster? Am I using an entirely different mechanism? Like, is that how do people have any input on that? How do you guys do that? Or do you?
Yeah, so I get it.
Oh.
Well, so I was going to say, for us, we don't use Helm at the moment because we had a compliance problem with running killer with the earlier versions. But we have a horrifying Ansible setup that does basically what Helm will do anyway. And so, but for us, yeah, we treat the stuff we get from what, public Docker registries the same as we do for the private one that we have in-house. In fact, we make a big
But yeah, we're small enough that we can probably move the mic around the room.
Yeah, so we, for us, one of the big things we want to do is reduce our dependency on upstream stuff. Because we run on AWS, so we make a big point of taking all the images we depend on and pushing them into ECR, because if AWS is down, we're down. We don't need to care about that. But if Docker Hub is down and we can't start nodes, then that's a sad time. For me, I guess, in terms of applications, I don't really think a sort of distinction between a bespoke application and a non-bespoke application is that useful in terms of getting the applications onto the cluster. I mean, it's useful in other ways, especially when it comes to packaging and things like that, I think. But I think in terms of actually the tooling that you would use to put the application onto a cluster, that's going to be the same no matter what. You're going to have a Docker image, and you're going to have some associated shenanigans around it, like services and ingresses and all that sort of stuff, to make it useful to other things. And that's going to be pretty much the same. The thing that will be different is where the Docker image is sourced from, and that's pretty much going to be the only difference as far as I can see.
No, don't throw the mic. I can. Oh.
Kind of, you will have an application and then you give your realm. This would be a service, right? Because service would be typically defined as an endpoint with a contract, right? So application, in my view, is essentially not only a single, so it could be a single service, but usually that's not a very useful application. You usually have lots of packages, lots of packages which have been installed into a cluster and therefore become running services which have been managed by the team, together work to create an application, which is then a higher level thing. You could obviously package that too with dependencies into package 2, and then this would be a higher level concept. I think this difference between service and application is what's one of the topics here, right? Because actually as an application developer, you're not interested in services really, you're interested in the whole thing.
I think in talking to the open service broker guys, talk about, well, I mean, so this is where things get complicated, right? Like, I guess we've kind of broken the categories up in some conversations to black box services, white box services, and gray box services, right? So OSB can open up a connection and provision a database, like it can provision managed relational database pretty much on any of the big 3 clouds. I'm not sure what the IBM and Oracle integration looks like right now, but I'm sure if they don't have a story around that, they will, right? So that service to a consumer is basically a black box service, right? There's an SLO around it, another team is managing it. You care about telemetry only in terms of like, did it go down? And if it goes down, who do I call? Get it back up, get me back inside my error budget, right? So then you got, white box services, and that's kind of what we're talking about a lot of times with applications, right? So I'm gonna turn up a bunch of primitives, whatever they are, and then I'm gonna provide a service potentially to another team. Now inside of the company, I own the service, I'm responsible for it, both the operations of the service, the deployment of the service, and probably the code for the service, unless it's like one of these pre-packaged, pre-box applications like MySQL. So then there's gray box, right? You could be sharing a cluster with somebody, providing a service to them, and you own the SLO. You own the internal service, but from their perspective, it's black box. From the larger organization's perspective, it's a black box service, it's a white box service, it's a gray box service. So I guess for Kubernetes, we really have all 3, and then just to confuse it more, service has an entirely different meaning inside of our infrastructure. So I mean, like all of these are kind of valid viewpoints, and for future directions of it, I mean, we do spend a lot of time talking about it, but I think what we want as a community is feedback from users and feedback from developers around how we should define these things, and like what your thoughts are.
Well, broadly speaking, it can be any kind of workload that takes an input and outputs something of value for the consumer.
As a definition for a service or an app.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's fair. But then how do we represent that in something that's meaningful inside of Kubernetes? Like one of the things that we've done from the app dev working group and kind of taken over inside of SIG Apps is this application CRD. And that's really how what we're trying to do to be able to aggregate these resources inside of Kubernetes and display them. Conrad over there has done some awesome work in terms of like actually doing a UI that's able to leverage this and take things that are like Helm packages and display them in a meaningful way to users and provide a way to interact with an application as a whole via UI.
Imagine there's the same binary image that runs into two different clusters with under two different URLs. Do you consider it the same application or different ones?
I mean, if the outlying client, so let's say it's in two different clusters at two different URLs that are fronted by a GSLB that are doing, closest minimum response time.
But independent installations, is it the same application or not?
Well, so that's what I'm saying. If the client is accessing each one independently, then maybe it's not. But if you have a global server load balancer in front of it or some type of programmable authoritative DNS,
I don't mean this.
so how does a
Independent installations like this, with their own data. We have this situation. We have two Docker registries, one for internal usage, one is for public access. It's the same code base,
Okay.
but it runs in different infrastructure accounts. It's completely independent. It might even have different SLOs.
So you have two instances of effectively the same application. Is what
We
you're,
have two different applications just using the same code base.
I mean, I think
Yeah, I don't know.
at that point you're kind of arguing semantics.
yeah, I mean,
I mean, I would say probably a more useful construct there is to think of the application as like being the class, and the installation is like the instance of a class. Like, you're taking a construct that exists in programming and extending it there. Saying an application is the image and the associated stuff that makes that image into a thing that runs and produces useful output. That's right there. Yeah. The installation of it is the instance of that application. And that you might have multiple instances of an application that share a backend data store. That kind of makes them one application then. Or
Yeah,
maybe you
if
have
they share the data store, then yes.
yeah.
If they don't, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
so then one of the harder problems we've been having with the application CRD is kind of dealing with notions of applications that are composed of other applications and defining exactly where that boundary is, right? Like, so if I have this gray box application, as far as the team that's managing it, that might be an app, right? As far as the organization that owns, let's say, multiple teams that are composed and sharing those services, the entire thing might be an application. And their notion of an app might be, I want to see everything, like all of those applications and their dependencies. The original KEP we had out for the application CRD had a notion of dependency, but I think it was Matt Butcher who kind of said, it doesn't work across namespaces, it doesn't really allow me to aggregate across clusters, so it's fairly weak. I'm not sure if this is useful in the general case. So it's actually an area where we're looking for a lot of input and contribution in terms of what will work for the community.
So one way of avoiding, so you're having discussion now around what is an application, right? Because it's an overloaded term. So maybe it's unfortunate to call the CRD an application.
That was also feedback we got from another developer. Maybe instead of calling it app,
A suggestion, but,
yeah. Well,
and the same thing applies to Helm, right? Helm has a sort of slightly contrived name, release.
you could call it a resource group, right? Because basically it's a group of things. You could call a Helm release a package version as opposed to a release, right? I mean,
It's about these three different hardest problems in computer science, right?
yeah, for sure, and caching.
You name things in a way that it's all my discussions.
For sure.
So I guess my question would be, what are the ways that people who haven't contributed much before could help out with this sort of discussion?
So on the application CRD, you can come to the repo, you can join the app dev working group, leave issues directly, comment on issues that are open. You can definitely open PRs. We will review them, not this week because we're all here, but at some point in the future. You can come every Monday morning, 9 a.m. PST, and participate in SIG Apps, which now I understand why it's at that time, because you guys, yeah. Yeah. But that's definitely a way. And that's kind of the cool thing about SIG Apps. Like, we really do get a lot of different viewpoints from a lot of different people at various different roles in their organizations. Everything from traditional sysadmin, SRE types, to developers, to organizations where there is no real clear distinction between that role, right? Like, I do dev, I do ops, I do PM if I have to. So definitely come and contribute and bring your ideas, and we're always willing to listen. And we want to move to maybe future directions of the Workloads API at this point, that's another thing. So how many of you guys run Kubernetes in production? Okay. Do the rest of you run it in QA or just considering, like, I'm here to take a look, but maybe not buy? Okay. POC, okay. Okay. So are you guys familiar with the Workloads API? No, okay. So who knows what a deployment is? So you're familiar with the Workloads API. Okay, what about stateful? Everybody familiar with stateful sets, daemon sets, so forth? So, I mean, that along with the batch API is pretty much what the whole thing is. And the only reason it's aggregated together, I don't really know the history of why we aggregated the whole thing together. I mean, I could tell you how it was invented, right? We had pods, people wanted many pods, then...
What do you mean by aggregated?
Well, I mean, so like daemon set starter is an extension to run system administrative tasks, right? That was after replication controller, which eventually turned into replica set when we took deployment config and turned it into deployment and brought it into the extensions group for. So there's a history of evolution, but I don't know how we named it Workloads API, other than just seeing references and documentation over the years, like it's the Workloads API.
Yeah, it's just from references.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, we invented the term.
So, but that's all it is. And ultimately all it is the stuff you run your workloads on top of. And a large number of the core contributors to that API are in the room right now. And that's the other thing SIG Apps brings for a lot of value, right? Everybody who's building Helm, everybody who's building ecosystem tools, everybody who's deploying a pod on Kubernetes can come and have a say and talk to the people who are developing this API and pushing features into it, maintaining it. And you can help us prioritize what bugs get fixed. You can help us prioritize what features get added. And we're very, very focused on adding customer value. Like, we're not sitting here just trying to do cool stuff because it's hard. There's a lot of that to do, but ultimately we want to do things that are going to keep production clusters healthy and let you guys run your workloads in a way that makes it easy. So come to the SIG Apps meeting, and that's an easy way to, get involved with that. So how many people are familiar with the workloads stability, like the fact that we just went GA? Okay, so for everybody else, people were basically running everything at a beta level of stability, which we tried really hard not to break, but we did break from time to time. For what, maybe 3 years-ish? Something along those lines?
3 years.
Yeah. So we finally took it V1, and one of the things about that was we deferred. There were a lot of things we want to do, and a lot of things we even wanted to do at the time, but we kind of took the position that, like, ultimately what we owe you guys more than anything else is stability. Like, all the other stuff we could do, everything else we could add to this API, has to take a backseat to, you want boring infrastructure. And we kind of got that message loud and clear, like, I just want it to work. So, I mean, at 3 years after a lot of revisions, we got it to a point where it was stable and it was working, and that's what we shipped, and we called that V1. We also did a lot of arguing amongst ourselves to try to convince each other that anything else we wanted to do in the future, we could do in a way that would be backward compatible and not break your clusters. So I guess kind of what future directions means are, like, what are the things that are most missing from the Workloads API? What are the things you want to see? And what are the things that we kind of feel are necessary from a stability perspective? So anybody have any thoughts?
Are we recording this, or can we just speak loudly? If we speak out loud, I think it's enough.
I mean, if we can all hear each other, it's being recorded, but I can repeat relevant things into this mic if that's helpful to people.
I can speak on loud, that's fine. So one thing I've been wondering about, whether there's any consideration that support for it, is canary releases or stage releases. Because the way I think the currently supported way to do this is on a very coarse level, to my understanding, which is on adding one more part and then updating the selector.
No.
You
No.
mean the deployment?
Yeah, exactly. Where I want to, let's say, have a new version of my application, but I only want 1% of the traffic to hit that canary instance, and then increase it gradually to ever more increasing numbers, 5%, 10%. What do you usually do to make sure to raise confidence in your new release? And, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the best solution out there right now is native tooling, especially not including anything ingress related, is to add one more pod and then update your label selector so that your service object gets like this this canary release included.
So for now, the suggested way is to create two deployments. One is the current stable version, one is the new version, and you keep increasing the new version's replicas. And both deployment will have, the same set of labels, except for one. For example, this one is the stable, and this one is the new release. And then you have one service that points to two deployments, so that some percentage of the users is going to get the new version and some get the old version.
But to my understanding, if like my existing deployment consists of 5 pods, so
Yeah.
we have a new canary release with a new version, the most minimum thing I can do is have that second deployment just run on a single pod.
Yes.
And then overall, I will have 6. So
Yeah.
that means like
So you
the
want
least
a-
version I can do is 1/6 of the.
Yeah, or you can use Istio.
Yeah, exactly. But that's my point. That brings me into the land of service meshes and ingresses and awful HTTP proxies. So I was wondering if it's worth considering if we want something like more simple, built right into Kubernetes, that doesn't require me to escalate into service meshes or these whole complex things. Because for me, again, like having a 5-pod deployment and adding another one, that's too big already. If I have a service with
I
lots
don't
of
think you can do that simply. I
That's my point.
think that's not realistic because you don't have the primitives to do that in the network.
That's why I'm raising the question.
Yeah, because the smallest unit in Kubernetes is a pod. So you cannot, split the traffic of a pod without things like Istio.
Or, I mean, like, if you wanted to do something like, all right, let's say, so I get, for a lot of people, I mean, some people are going to tell you the future is Istio, the future is Linkerd, the future is service meshes, and that may be true. Maybe that's not true for everybody. The simplest thing you can do is set up a mixer in front of your servers that does it for you, right? Because you're not looking for like mutual auth TLS between every pod and zero trust authentication or rolling traffic update. Like none of the core features for Istio are of interest. You just want a simple traffic mister. I mean, that's what would a primitive like that look like inside of Kubernetes, and how would we implement it at the network layer, right? I mean, I'm not really sure that there's a good way to do that based not only on the primitives that we represent in the API, but on the representation that we have for the network fundamentally as a physical entity without doing something like a service mesh. Like IP tables isn't going to get you that if you're looking for layer 7 load balancing and traffic filtering.
I don't remember if IP tables can give you this, but you can have weights.
Yeah. Like
All
if
the
weight,
pods,
yeah,
then
if
maybe.
sorry, like if weight would be baked into the ingress object and then the output.
No, not the
Ingress or the
no,
ingress?
in the pod selectors.
Yes. But but this,
Attach the weights. I mean, we do this with AHG proxy, in our pre-Kubernetes deployments.
So you weight it based on the, go ahead.
I was about to say, but how do you do that? Because the pod has no connection to the network.
Right.
Like there's no link between the pod and the network.
Or kube proxy or whatever.
But I mean, so the whole point of a pod though is that it's defined by the fact that there's a local host that's shared amongst all the containers. That's it. So there's no, but there's no way for you to say like if you say at the service level this pod is this way and this pod is this way, the service is not the thing that is routing the traffic.
Well, we have actually rules for each service, and if you can bake the weight of a pod, which you know at service level, into the priority of that IP table probability, into the probability of that IP table rule, then you could eventually achieve weights for pods.
That comes down though to a kube proxy problem
Yeah.
and not actually a construct of the pod. I mean, yeah, you can put an annotation on the service object right now, and I mean, I'd say the right way to do that in my mind is to build something that takes an annotation off the pod, proof of concept it to say, okay, you put weight annotations on the pods, and then you have this special version of kubeproxy that reads those annotations off the
You want
service.
to mutable because you want to ingest those weights.
Yeah, do that. But I mean,
Well, I mean, so, okay, so the label ban or annotation, but yeah, like that, you know, the point that I'm making is you have some like it seems like the right way to do that would be to
what, that you could do IP table routes?
do that in the usual way that you
summarize
would
what
think
they
to, which is to
discussed.
add an annotation or a label or something that doesn't require a full metadata change of the object, and then create a custom version that reads that thing, does different actions to what something would normally do, prove that the idea works, and then come back and say, okay, my proposal is this, you know, my proposal is that we have weights and that we implement it in this way using something like kubeproxy to do it. I think if we're trying to argue that, yeah, we should have this thing, this field on the object or this field on the object, without a pretty good idea of how you're going to implement that, then all you're doing is bike shedding, right? Like you're just sort of sitting there being like, well, the bike shed should be red, the bike shed should be yellow, like without someone actually having tried it out and seen if it works.
We actually do it, by the way.
But
OpenShift only does it.
Yeah, so
Actually,
there you
we
go,
have it on
so-
OpenShift, so we have routes, which is something like ingress,
Mm.
not only for OpenShift, and you have weights there.
yeah,
So
well, I mean, so if the idea works, then that's cool. But like,
that's actually.
But then there's another complication, right? So even if they're kind of slowing down, like, so Kubernetes has tried to be more stable over the past couple of releases and take less things into core. This, especially if OpenShift has already tried it out, if there was enough demand for it, I mean, it's reasonably something we could probably.
I think Clayton actually does canaries with it,
Actually,
using the hooks and
Tim,
custom deployments.
Tim mentioned yesterday during the Contributor Summit that he prefer more the OpenShift routes than the current Ingress implementation.
Yeah, nobody's really happy with.
But the Ingress implementation, so the Ingress implementation might change over time, but I wouldn't bet on it happening too soon.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I think it's kind of, I would just go further with the topics because
Yeah, I mean, this is
Talking
more like a
about-
SIG network
exactly,
discussion.
this is
Sure.
entirely SIG networking.
So-
I would rather direct people that are actually interested in improving that to direct them to the SIG networking.
I guess,
We will never be fixing that. We can provide some feedback, but I think the SIG networking has.
Bowie and guys would be much better off in terms of, yeah.
They know better what's going on with it, what are the problems currently,
But
and the struggles that they are having.
But at least I can take it as an action item to make sure that networking is aware of it,
Yeah.
and here's your request. And that's another function that SIG Apps will play. Like if you come to our meetings and you do have a complaint that's relevant about deployments, but really requires SIG app or SIG networking, or in some cases SIG storage to implement it, we'll carry the message for you. So I'll take an action to take that to Bowie.
Part of it is SIG networking and part of it is SIG apps, because the weight and the networking part, sure, that's ingress.
But that's
But
the,
how do you actually do the canaries without actually creating two deployments, which is kind of crazy. But we could have a first level concept for it. Like for stateful sets, if you actually use it, there is a partition and ordinate field that will actually allow you to stop the rollout at particular points. So it will create, say, 2 new pods and leave the rest old ones. So we have auto-pausing for stateful sets.
but auto pausing was a lot easier to implement because stateful sets are ordinal in nature, right? And you can say too, also they're not probabilistic, whereas, you know, a replica set tries to give you 3-ish, right? You might get 4, you might get 2 at any particular time. So the pause would have to have different semantics probably.
Not talking about the implementation
Yeah.
now, but maybe the concept is something we should consider.
I mean, like, I'm not opposed to that. I've always been in favor of having a uniform pause across all of them if people think it's useful. Like, there was a reason it went into stateful set, right? Like, as an idea, it's definitely, I think something we should reconsider.
I guess I was trying to be more to say in a long-winded way when you guys just said. So.
Oh, do auto pause?
But no, too, that, yeah, a lot of what we were talking about was network.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, honestly, for people who do come to SIG Apps, a lot of times we do get kind of, so I mean, the application tier is really dependent upon what Brian and Tim tend to call the nucleus, which is pod, the storage APIs, the networking APIs. So, you know, we kind of take your requirements, drive them into the Workloads API interface, and sometimes that drives requirements all the way down into the nucleus. And we may not always implement them ourselves, but we'll chase down the right people to go implement them. So other things. Do we want to continue on workloads? Do we want to move to Helm 3?
Maybe just one comment. So one of the workloads which was basically really not stable in pre-GA is all the cron job stuff.
It's okay. It's not personal.
I can point. Yeah, I mean, it's not like criticism, but it's like just like a very. I mean, normally like in Kubernetes you have beta features, and you actually a lot of people rely on alpha and beta, and this is like normal, right? And in this case, actually, it crashes your cluster because it like goes crazy and has no. So what I mean is,
You're talking about, wait, to be specific, you're talking about an issue where cron job creates like a monotonically increasing number of jobs which never get cleaned up and it crashes the control plane. Okay.
So that was alpha feature.
like, don't get defensive. It's not a point. But what I wanted to say is, what I would, yeah, I know it fixed and it works. But we used it from alpha, and I was really happy with the concept because it's like one of these things which Kubernetes really gives you this high-level abstraction. Every stupid dev wants a cron job once in a while, right?
Yep.
So, and like the traditional, maybe our past approach was, okay, maybe you have a Java app and then have a whatever your class job in there, which is totally stupid, right? So, what I mean is, like, I think this concept is really valuable as a high-level abstraction, and we use it. I think what is right now, like, not totally feasible, at least what we tell our users, is, okay, don't do cron job if you do something every minute, every 3 minutes or something, because it starts pods and so on, and it's like a kind of hold up. This is more a comment than a suggestion, so I think it's really valuable. It was not so good that it was not stable before, now it is. But what I see, what I would like us to have more guidance on when to use cron job, what are the trade-offs, and basically even now you could basically in certain conditions still have the same problems like before, right?
So in the beta, the problem with all jobs being left behind, that was implemented already in 1.9, I think.
Yeah.
But we never defaulted those because we didn't want to break the API. Upon graduation to beta, that if you create a cron job using the beta endpoint, the revision history limits will get defaulted to 1 for the failed pods and 3 for the successful job thing. So that's on by default. And
I'm saying I don't have any problem right now, so everything is good.
So yeah. No,
what I'm saying is,
I can point you
like,
to
yeah.
multiple issues with that, but did you have any problems at a big scale when you're running more than a couple thousand concepts? Did you have any experience?
We
on
don't
that?
do it right now, but we're also like careful, barely. So that's what I mean. Like as a SIG apps.
So let me compare to with that. We were bitten by the fact that there was no tuning by the concept controller in OpenShift really badly in the online environment. Exactly by the same issue. That somebody created a cron job that was creating a job, simple one. Hello. It was like literally somebody copy paste the example, which was like calculating pi or just doing hello world in the online environment, like close. So yes, I'm aware of those issues. There's one major issue that I have, and I want to ensure that cron job will not be promoted to GA until that is fixed, which is the controller needs a significant rewrite.
For shared informers?
To shared informers. And there's only just me and Janet that can do it. Yeah. Unless I trigger a friend of mine to actually do it.
So out of curiosity, does anybody, so who uses cron job? Who uses job?
We explicitly recommend users not use them.
Not to use job?
Not to use cron job for the same reasons, basically.
I see, okay.
We tell people who say we're in the cluster and they want to use cron jobs, like, no, use our out-of-cluster cron infrastructure, don't use the one in the cluster.
But only for the fact that it was not cleaning the old.
Yeah, I mean, so we were running on OpenShift, I think it was the same exact.
Yeah.
So another thing we are looking at to prevent this is at the API server level, trying to do per object quotas, yeah. So job is kind of funny in that, like, the way The way most people think about job is that the job should run to completion, and let's say that you wanted to save something off. Prior to completing successfully, it should probably save that off somewhere off cluster. That's not the way it's implemented, and that's not currently the way it's documented. Currently, it says, go ahead, run, we'll save the pods off for you, and then you can go into them later and get your... Yeah. So that's a thing, and that kind of causes issues where clusters get overwhelmed. So looking at that, we're probably going to fix it because it is V1. We can't really break it completely by putting quotas on there to keep the control plane safe no matter how crazy it gets.
So for me, one of the reasons I have a whole bunch of internal customers who couldn't use jobs because their job, the things they wanted to run as jobs were too heavy on side effects, and they didn't want them to restart. Again, this is before some of the stuff that you put in more recently about restart controls.
The policy, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, really, thanks for that, by the way.
Actually, I didn't wrote that one.
Okay,
But I'm sure that it is there. Yeah, it's something that I was dying to see as well because I was thinking of like the job or kicking off over and over and over.
Yeah, because I mean,
the part for you.
I mean, the example that I always give is if you're running a build that makes a commit back to the repo halfway through, you can't just restart that from the start, without it running to completion. Like there's going to be lots of other things that are not properly identified in jobs. Like it felt like originally the job construct was strongly pushed you towards some sort of MapReduce kind of thing, where you take the work and if you finish it, you finish it. If you don't, then it goes back on the queue. It's all good.
Except we don't have a queue, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We just envisioned the happy path.
Yeah.
For the record, we just envisioned the happy path.
For the record, that was me and Eric. None of us envisioned the set path, and that's how we got it implemented initially. And then we started working on cron jobs, and we moved on, and none of us had enough time to actually properly fix it. So if you have some time, I'll be more than happy to help you get started with either of them.
Right. Okay.
That goes to anybody in the room.
Like,
If,
really,
if we broke it, you're welcome to help fix it. We are totally always looking for contributions.
because reach out to me. There was a bug with cron job controller where it was it was with the validation. We didn't because whenever you're creating a job from a cron job, we're preparing a hash of the timestamp, and that led to a problem where you could overflow the name of the job creator. So Julie, I helped her go through the source code, find the places that need to be fixed,
Actually, not
field
good.
the PR, got it merged. So, just reach out to me on Slack. I'll be more than happy to help you with getting those stuff fixed. I'll point you to the exact lines of code that needs fixing and how to fix it. I'll ensure to get your PR reviewed and approved and merged.
Cool.
And you just need to find some time. Ping me once, twice, sometimes 3 times. It'll be crazy over the next 3-4 weeks because we will have a code freeze by the end of May.
Yeah.
So it might be, and especially that I'm currently also involved in the SIG CLI. I'm co-leading that one. It might be,
Yes.
I have so many stuff to do in both of them. But yes, I'm more than happy to help you get started and move it forward.
So tell everyone your Slack ID.
Can you write it? That would be the
Oh, yeah.
That's not true.
How is it spelled?
TSH?
TYSH.
TYSH.
Yeah, TYSH. Yeah.
Please don't call every time.
So one other question. How many people are running anything stateful on top of Kubernetes? Stateful. Databases, or is everybody primarily running like serving workloads?
I'll be doing a major migration.
So, okay.
Stateful sets.
Well, that was my other question. How are you running them? Are you using manifests straight up primarily? Or are you using stateful sets? Or are you using operators?
We use our own Postgres operator.
Okay.
Anybody wants to try it out?
Is it open source?
Yeah, of course. It's based on Patroni, which actually a lot of people use.
Yeah.
Cool. What's it called?
Postgres operator and Zalando incubator. So
Okay.
there's
Oh, there's a Lando one.
there's
Okay.
only one from CrunchDB and ours, and guess which one is better?
So one more thing about SIG Apps, we do not take sides. We do not officially endorse.
But there's one important thing about the Patroni thing. It's written in Python. That's how it wins over Crunchy. I'm sorry.
And it's crunchy, I believe it's crunchy data, not crunchy DB, just to get their name right.
Yeah, actually we fix it because we use stateful set just to get the number 1, 2, 3.
Well, that's fine. Why is that stupid?
Well, because it's a stateless app.
Well, does it require uniqueness? Like,
Which needs just a unique ID of each pod.
so, I mean, that's actually one of the intentions of stateful set, though, right? It doesn't, just because it provides storage primitives, doesn't mean you actually have to write data to it. If you require a unique identity, particularly a unique network identity, that's not stupid. That's what it's designed for. So there are definitely, you're not, I know you feel alone. I know you're like, I could have done this with the deployment. I'm the only person doing this. You're not. Other people do the same thing. Yeah. And it's actually an intended use case. So that's fine. So like, if anyone's like at work going to you, be like, yeah, it's a guy who uses stateful set for the number. You can just be like, hey, that's an intended use case. I'm doing it correctly. Look at the video. Yeah.
You may not want that for your stateless app.
Yeah.
Stateless set actually updates one by one, and it always waits for the other one to be online.
It could be slow for your updates.
Sometimes it gets back to bite us.
If you don't have the volumes, then it's faster.
Well, it also, that depends on how fast your cloud provider mounts and unmounts, right? So.
Anybody is using Elasticsearch on Kubernetes? I mean, we run it naively right now, but we will migrate something bigger and we'll do probably either use the operator or rewrite something.
I would say Elasticsearch is one of the most popular applications people talk about running Kubernetes on. There's some issues with stateful set and Elasticsearch just because like you have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to tell it to stop the rolling update and not leave the cluster under-replicated when it reports ready, right? Because an Elasticsearch shard says, hey, I'm ready to serve traffic. I'm good. But there's an entirely separate check for if knocking that shard over would leave the Elasticsearch cluster under-replicated. There is, like, I mean, stateful set was always a promise of like, no batteries included. You have to bring a little bit of spit and duct tape for your application in order to wire it in and get it to work, right? But we were talking about this yesterday about doing something specific to make it a little bit easier to run Elasticsearch natively on a stateful set and to be able to block the rolling update when it is under-replicated. There are entire categories of distributed system that would benefit from that type of a feature. So we're thinking about that. And maybe one thing we could do in SIG Apps is bring in a lot of I have a lot of discussions these days with people who want to run Elasticsearch, who are running Elasticsearch on Kubernetes, or who are Elastic the company. So maybe bringing everybody into a room in SIG Apps to talk about these things and kind of decide what the correct direction for the community is would be a great thing. There are at least 2 Elasticsearch operators out there. One of them is of a pretty good quality. So I mean, maybe coming together as a community and putting all efforts into that would be the right thing to do. Or if Elastic was willing to, get involved in it, maybe having them host something that we all contributed, that would be good too. But yeah, you are not alone in saying, God, I try to put the stateful set in, I start the rolling update, and then it causes a disruption that leaves my cluster under-replicated, and it takes me a while to come back up, and this is just a nightmare. So yeah, we're working on it. So anything else on the workloads, or do you want to move toward Helm?
I guess I might have an update.
Sure. Okay, so for one of the things we decided not to do in the core API prior to GA, that if you're an OpenShift user, you might be familiar with, are deployment hooks. Anybody heard of these things? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you wrote them, right? So the premise is, let's say you are running a database, and let's say prior to a rolling update on your web application, you want to put a hook in to do a schema migration on the database, right? Or maybe after.
The reason we were waiting for 1.8 before implementing these migrations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we talked about doing hooks, and then we said, okay, we can leave it out. Let's ship the stable surface first because we know we can add it later in a way that doesn't break it. So, yeah.
Explain why you would need those hooks? Database migration doesn't sound like something I would do with a hook.
Well, you kick off a cron job that actually does a schema of, that's a typical use case, actually, I think. Like from OpenShift, that's something you guys see all the time. There are any number of things that you might want to do as a pre-start trigger or a cleanup hook after you've done a deployment. Yeah. I mean, he wrote them. They're in OpenShift right now. He knows pretty much. Oh, you wrote them. That's right.
So Clayton wrote the stuff.
No one wants to blame.
Yeah, so
Do you want to say?
I can tell about the proposal. So we support, we have deployment configs, which is, it's what predates deployments in Kubernetes. And we support different kinds of hooks. We support pre-hooks, so before a deployment starts, a rollout, you can do whatever you like a database migration, or there are different use cases actually. You can bring down a different service, different deployment, because your deployment depends on that. So you want to do an upgrade, and first you have to like switch stuff, routes or whatever. We have support also post hooks for sending emails or whatever you like, clean up stuff, bring up back a service that depends on your service that you upgraded. And also we support mid hooks for recreate deployments, which is also a place where you want to do, actually that's the place where you want to do a database migration, because you bring down your database and then you do the schema migration, then you bring it back up, the new version. And we want to, because our customers depend on that stuff, and we want to have this feature in Kubernetes with deployments, and potentially also stateful sets and daemon sets can take advantage of those features.
Yeah, I will follow on that. So Michael has basically said the use cases, and I will tell you about the plan for it, if it gets approved anyways. The difference would be like, we want to have it in general, so you could actually run it at any percentage. So if your deployment reach like 0, 20, or whatever you choose, it will run a hook for you. So the way it will be implemented is like, it will actually use hook, jobs. So it will create a job, and you can configure anything there, like it's your customization point. It will run a job for you. So you can choose what you want to do there. Like a special use case, I guess, if you want to do canaries, you could actually use that hook to create a separate service, matching the labels for the new pods from the new replica set. So you would have kind of split it for the deployment into two, from the old replica and from the old replica set and from the new one. Mm-hmm. So you could actually switch traffic if you would have ingress with weights. I think that's how we do it in OpenShift, or at least our customers do. Because I actually see this as a strong customization point. Like,
Customizing your rollouts.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. Like, you guys can actually choose what it should do. We'll just run the job for you at a specific point. You tell us, and we run it. And it's up to you if you want to do some notification, database migration, whatever. You can do crazy stuff with it even. Yeah. I guess that's it. If you have questions, feel free to ask.
Can you talk about your proposal? Your proposal?
Yeah, there's a proposal on GitHub, and I don't really recall the number, but you will find it if you search for lifecycle hooks.
Brian probably knows the number.
Of course he knows the number.
Like, thanks.
Existing customer wants this. Does any new customer want this, which doesn't know of OpenShift to use this? You know what I mean?
Does anyone in the...
Devil's advocate, like,
So-
okay, you want to implement it upstream because someone is relying on this, but is this actually valuable for the product community? Because it sounds like, okay, database migrations are good in there. Notifications is something, okay, I could imagine for any event or anything. So it sounds like a special solution in your case for deployment. But
Yeah, actually, that's why we have a proposal, because we want to gather feedback from the community and find more use cases.
So that's the thing. For anybody who's not a contributor to core Kubernetes, everything in the ecosystem works through opening an issue and eventually, so okay, let's go to the new process. The new process is a CAP. So rather than opening a proposal inside of community, what you open is a CAP, which is a little bit more convoluted, but basically it's a proposal. That has to go through a process of receiving feedback from everybody in the community. And for the existing features that have open caps and open proposals, anyone in this room or anyone else for that matter is open to come in and leave feedback. So before we start implementing code or before we start moving things in, we want to get general consensus, not just from OpenShifters or Googlers or Amazonians or anybody else, like for any one product that it works. We want your consensus that it's something that you want to see inside of core Kubernetes, and that's the only way it gets in.
So what does CAP stand for?
Kubernetes improvement process, enhancement process. Yeah.
Process or proposal? I think
It's proposal. Okay. Yeah. So that sounds about right. No, the same as Java and JEP is the same, right? Java enhancement process or proposal is.
GCP,
Yeah.
JCR.
PlayStation Plus, but so I mean it's our new thing. It's not, yeah, proposal. It's not 100% hashed out yet, but we've been using it successfully for a few things. So yeah, you're welcome to open them. You're welcome to contribute to them, and yeah, and to comment too. Like generally the best designs get hashed out by many people bringing all of their use cases together and considering things that maybe you wouldn't before. And that's also kind of been one of the strengths of SIG Apps because we tend to be such a diverse community. We get a lot of people who are administrators contributing to ideas that are being, brewed up by developers that kind of have a little bit more reality to them. Like, well, hey, that's not really safe for somebody who's got to deal with it at 2 o'clock in the morning, just so you're aware. We probably shouldn't do that. So I guess moving on to Helm. How many of you guys are, oh, sure.
Before you go, I have a
Sure.
question. I'm not sure if it belongs in SIG Apps or
Well,
under the workload.
ask it and let's find out.
So I have these colleagues, they are like data scientists, they know the big data stuff, and I kind of want to run ETL jumps. And I kind of want to avoid having to run a scheduler on a scheduler.
I see. So you want to try to get Kubernetes to do it, or do you want to try?
I found an issue that was open and actually closed by Sol. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
This guy, right?
Yeah. So you should have stayed with it. You probably don't have an answer now, but if anyone has any tips how they provide such support for like your colleagues?
I mean, our data scientists run Airflow, for example.
Yeah.
I think Airflow is such a, like a beast, I mean, you don't see this in
Airflow doesn't
Kubernetes.
run nicely on Kubernetes.
Well, wait, actually, hold on.
That was about the
So we're actually,
workload thing.
yeah, the community, so one, Airflow tends to be a workflow scheduler, which is that's a way you could set up an ETL pipeline, right? There is work in the Airflow community and in conjunction with the Kubernetes community to provide first-class support for Airflow in Kubernetes.
I think EPR just got merged
Like last week.
There's a history behind the workflow thing. We, along with Dario from Amadeus, we were pushing the workflow thing. We even got to the point that we had the proposal accepted, merged, and Dario started actually working on the implementation. But then I was talking, and that was like 2 years ago, because I was talking with Google folks back in London. Yeah, and they told me that no, they have something internally that does not work, and everyone are using external stuff. And then we had a lengthy discussion with Brian and Eric, again, about the topic, and we agreed back at the time that it will be reverted. The proposal was removed entirely, and that whatever will happen around the workflow should happen outside of the core. And that was the beginning of ensuring that we are not putting into the kube core stuff that is more higher level, that can be built on top of the primitives that the Kubernetes already provides. So yeah, that was one of the reasons, and that's probably why I closed your proposal issue, whatever. Okay, yeah. It is a known stuff. And actually earlier today, the CERN had their presentation. I can't remember the name of the workflow they are using.
Argo?
No, it's Yargo, something like that. Yeah. Written with Yargo, something like that. Yeah.
So there are Kubernetes native workflow schedulers, but you are going to run a scheduler instead of a scheduler. So previous to my yeah, so yeah. Airflow, I mean, Airbnb still uses Airflow, they're Kubernetes users, and there are...
You can use Kubernetes as a backend.
Yes.
Yeah. And the protocols just got merged last time.
At the moment we have like an Airflow running on Kubernetes, but there is of course issues with it, like all the logs.
No, you can use Kubernetes as a backend. So as a job, like the job scheduler is Kubernetes.
Have a look at the Jaeger, the CERN folks. I'm very curious. I need to find and talk to them because they're like literally using that, and I'm very curious about their feedback. But I would say if Jaeger is working at CERN, you should be pretty happy about it, given the scale that they have for Kubernetes.
Right.
So it's definitely worth talking with them. I don't know how, because I'm trying to find them, but there's like, from what I've heard, there's just 3 people out of more than 4,000 that I need to nail somehow. I tried on Twitter. I don't know if I got succeeded. Definitely report back.
I guess
maybe we could get them talk on the SIG Apps
about the workflow. But again, we could get a lot of people to talk about various. So I mean, like one of the guys on my team is actually contributing to the Airflow and Kubernetes thing. So there's a lot of interest in making that a better experience if it's a bad experience for you right now. And then there's so many other ones that it's like, at this point we've evolved a community, like an entire ecosystem of Kubernetes workflow schedulers. Even if you think about like Metaparticle is in some ways kind of like a code native workflow scheduler, right? Like there are a lot of things that fit that domain. There's no way at this point, because we have an ecosystem of them, that we could pick one and just bring it into core. That would be, yeah, that's that. I'm sure everybody, I mean, he's using Airflow.
I'm just asking for tips.
Yeah, is anybody else doing workflow scheduling on Kubernetes? A little bit, maybe?
Yeah, well, we've got our own one, so.
Okay.
Smith is the one that Mikhail from the last year is working on.
Okay.
It's not exactly what it is something.
I can just say in-house we run both Astomon and
Ooh, okay.
on Kubernetes. Didn't Brandon release something around words?
Metaparticle. That was the thing, but that's, I don't know if that's production ready at the moment. I'm not sure. Maybe? No, we can look it up. So do we have anything more on workloads, or do we want to move to Helm? Okay, well, Helm. Okay, Helm. Okay, so I think one of the other co-chairs, Matt, was responsible primarily for the latest 2.9 release, which was basically stability release for more than anything else. I mean, 2.9 is going into break-fix BAU mode at this point. Helm 3 is probably what everyone is interested in. And it's in active development. All of the stuff you see listed here is really mostly ideation at this point, but this is a good capture of the direction that Helm seems. Oh, just to curious, are there any Helmers in the room? People who contribute to Helm, we're back there. Yes, either code or charts. Okay. So what's people's primary interest in Helm? Just using the charts off the shelf as is?
So it's kind of like early days with RTMs and those things, right?
and you got to fork it.
You have to
Yeah.
resource it or something, and then you have to tweak and have just one more thing that can be configured. So I think for us, it's like 3 out of 4 times we have to tweak. I guess that's a community learning process also. What should charts look like here?
So from my perspective, all I can say is this, like, if you look in the Helm repository, there are a lot of charts that are well thought out in terms of how do I deploy the application. But the lifecycle management, the day 2 operations really isn't baked into Helm. And I don't know if that's really the right place for it. So that's one issue I've seen people have. The other is you got to find some way to inject, some way to extract metrics and telemetry from anything that you're turning up in Helm if you're actually going to run it in production, which isn't something that I've seen templated in most of the charts there. I mean, most of the questions I see when I open up is like, well, how do I know that's working? Like, you're not pulling anything out that's giving you useful metrics. So I'm assuming people are forking them and also adding like metrics collection sidecars or finding a way to actually get telemetry out of the cluster to some type of aggregator so they can tell that it's up as well. I think in Helm 3, they're looking at better ways to template that so it's easier to add it. And now with the mutating webhooks, there are ways you could do injections of sidecars so you could actually turn up a Helm template and then mutate it inside of your cluster in order to do things like if you wanted to put it on a mesh network or if you wanted to just add a sidecar for log shipping or like add a Datadog collection sidecar. There are feasible paths to do that.
I was hoping to meet some Helm developers yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, like they did tell me they were coming and then like I guess it got late, a few beers got back. I'm going to yell at them later.
What is the status? I mean, for me, it's like similar with, so we are not using Helm at the moment. And actually, from my experience, so we contributed, I think, 2 Helm things, one like my private thing, and one from here. And the process was really painful. So having a 1 month to like get it very simple Helm, and then adding a logo another 1 month because of the sample repositories. I think this was.
Okay.
I'm not sure if this is now like addressed or fixed. And so this was the only kind of value added I saw. Okay, there's this app store, which is kind of nice, right? Okay, I want to have discoverability.
You're talking about a chart repository?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and this was really painful. So even the minimal value add that I saw was really painful process. And then later on I added this logo and just for because I mean what do you have to review with a logo, right? And this took another month or something.
Ooh.
So, yeah, and then there's this problem that even if you have a chart, for example, for Platformia or something, then I mean, I wouldn't want to use this chart to run in production, right? I know I have to change something.
People do tend to fork them right now in order to run them from what I've seen, but some people do just run them as is. Again, they may be using other methods in order to modify the pod to do things like get telemetry, add log shippers. Not sure. But what was your specific question in terms of what had been addressed?
Yeah, so for example, this workflow for charts and repositories, so to not have, so for example, if you go to something else, like whatever, maybe Central or NPM or whatever, anybody can publish packages without kind of having to go through the central process.
Well, so, I mean, like generally, I think what a lot of people are doing is turning up an internal repository, and there are definitely ways that you can point your Helm, point tiller, and in Helm 3 there will be no tiller, to multiple repositories for resolution. So I think people are generally turning up their own repos internally. And especially like when we talked about bespoke applications earlier, a lot of people have their own Helm charts that they develop internally, and that's primarily what they're using. So I think internal Helm repos are kind of the suggested mechanism to solve that problem. In terms of making it less painful, I think Chart Museum is probably the current state of the art for making Helm less painful. I'm not a user of it. I know the authors of it. They seem to be, for their organization, they claim it solved that problem and added a lot of value. I would point you at that, not officially endorsing it, of course, but just saying that like it's a method that other people have been successful with.
Yeah, me too. That's what I was talking to Andrew about.
Ah.
Let's chat.
Anyone
So you can do that. And the other thing is, are you guys aware of how you can get a hold of the Helm developers directly? Well, maybe. I mean, Michelle's there for sure. I don't know how many of the Matt showed up. Did Matt Butcher come this year or no? So, yeah. Okay. So you could try to find them there. The other thing is every other Tuesday, 9 a.m., you could just come to the developer. Hey. Hi. You can come to the Helm developers talk, and you can get them every week. So that's definitely, or SIG Apps. They pretty much always show up to SIG Apps.
I have one comment. I don't think to take this thing off topic, but when it comes to making Helm less painful, I think one good improvement would be to have a different templating system.
So that's a thing.
Or JSONet or anything that is structurally aware.
So okay, all right. I'm going to channel my Helm developer right now. So in theory, the templating system that's currently inside of Helm is loosely coupled. You could replace it with another templating system if you wanted to. And this is in Helm too. Like there is an entire mechanism inside of Helm that actually allows you to replace the existing templating system with another one.
Can you get values from it?
You want it to work with existing Helm.values?
I tried the case on the Helm plugin.
Well, no, I'm not talking about an existing plugin. You'd have to put some SWE hours into it and actually develop your own integration for your templating system and plug it into Helm. But the Helm developers put that hook in there on purpose to allow for people to develop their own templating system. I think in Helm 3, one of the goals is to make it easier to do that. So maybe the answer would be for Helm 2, just use Go templates for now, and then for Helm 3, hopefully you'll have an easier time of being able to integrate another plugin. The other thing is, if you're looking for case-on Helm integration in specific, Brian Lyles is your guy.
Yeah, I've tried it. It
Okay.
has one shortcoming, which is that it has no access to the values we specify in the command,
Yeah.
which is one of the fundamental features that we give our system.
If you do Helm set, it's like, yeah. So, I mean, for Helm 3, again, they're trying to make it easier to integrate. If you're looking for Helm case on it in specific, I would try to get one of the Matts and Brian Lyles in the room and see if they're willing to support or what the direction would be going forward. It's definitely, so different templating systems in Helm is definitely a goal, like the ability to support them.
So during this conference, I've tried to talk to different people, and every time I mention Helm, people make funny faces, and I think it's mostly two reasons for that. It's a templating system. They probably wasted 2 hours of their lives trying to find out new line issues, and there's also the fact that it's the tier that renders the actual YAML, right, which Hem3 is going to solve, right?
In theory, yes. Yeah, well, Tiller's gone, right? So it's going to be completely client-side for Helm 3. So that should be interesting.
I have a question for whoever is using Helm. So how are you storing your config when it's generated by Helm? Do you just leave it in the cluster, the deployment and whatever is created by Helm?
So currently it's just a killer, right?
I mean,
I've considered running Helm templates and storing them, but then I have to worry about resources that go away.
Okay.
so you just checking the template, the Helm template.
Yeah, so we have our own system for managing different values in different clusters. For
Well, we talked about the first 4.
So the end result is basically you push something into the cluster. Maybe one day we'll rewrite that as an operator. But we try to do it command line simple first, and then change that into something clear.
Others?
Yeah, we have the order in our code table. Just the sequence, we have them out of them.
So originally, one of the reasons that we ended up using Ansible and not Helm was that
So that, well, I mean, interfacing Kubernetes with secret stores in a reasonable way is something that's kind of a work in progress too, right? So Kubernetes Vault integration is a thing, and then interfacing with the various hardware key management systems that exist on the various cloud providers is probably going to leverage that same infrastructure, right? So the idea we want better secrets management interfaces and potentially even configuration store interfaces are things that the community is actively looking into right now, because we have these primitives on the cloud, and stuffing config maps into etcd is kind of like relative to what we could be doing a little weak, right? So same with stuffing secrets into the API server when we could be consuming them from something that's a bit more purpose-built for that.
Yeah, like right now, we've got a whole bunch of stuff that deploys that needs, and of course your classic problem is search, right? Like, you need search everywhere, especially if you're running an aggregated API server or something like that. You've got a million certs that you've got to push into the cluster somehow. You want those certs to be, version controlled somewhere, but you can't version control anywhere in an unencrypted form, so you end up needing to have an encryption on it. So, yeah, so I mean, right now, Ansible Vault was the only solution that we've been able to find that would work for us. But I'd love to not have to use Ansible. I'd love to have something that's a bit more declarative, that's not so imperative.
Cool. So we're running low on time. We didn't get through everything. We did kind of talk about applications, the app CRD. I think we can continue if we want to. Well, that's a good question.
I think we're getting a hint that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm feeling that's the wrap it up box, the very nice wrap it up box right there. But
I mean, in other rooms, they throw people out.
they do?
They should say, take it outside.
Yeah, but they need the room. This is like the last hurrah. So I mean, like, honestly, what I would say is this: definitively, we can continue having conversations outside of the room in 5 minutes and just like do our own thing. Nobody's going to kick us out of the building. Well, I hope no one's going to kick us out of the building.
Hotel bar in the next building.
Yeah, we could do that too.
If we still look at Helm, so one of my personal pain points with it is that I'm still a little fuzzy on the whole notion how it handles diffs during the upgrades.
Are you talking about the applies?
Yeah, every once in a while I find myself in a situation when somebody in between the upgrade, somebody went ahead and changed manifest manually.
Yeah.
And
So-
suddenly I found myself in a difficult position.
So there is that, but I think the real answer for that is server-side apply. But that's going to take, oh yeah. So, I mean, it's a work in progress right now. Maybe we get an alpha in 1.11, if not alpha like 1.12, I guess. So you're looking for at least 3 releases before it comes out in a beta usable way enabled by default. You could talk to the API machinery guys. Daniel Smith in particular is a good person to reach out to, who's at the conference now. He's kind of been spearheading the effort of it. The answer is basically this: when you do kubectl apply, that's client-side code. That Helm is basically vendored, and everyone else has vendored or implemented themselves in some kind of way that's sort of like the way kubectl does it. So what we're trying to move is all of that logic to the server. So in theory, all of that diff logic and all of that, everything you're doing when you're doing a strategic merge patch or a 3-way merge patch should live server-side in the near future. Yeah, and it should just work. Now, if you're asking, can I help you fix the problem you have today with what is in production right now? No, I think it's a problem that's pretty common. We've heard complaints about it, but it's not unique to Helm. I mean, I guess the best thing you can do is try to diff what you've got currently with what you have client side to determine if it's been modified before applying your update. And that's a way you can go, but it's also fairly hard to automate, right? Like, where do you look? Like, I mean, basically, you could say, well, if the diff is empty, then we have or if the diff is not empty, then we have a problem. But what do you do with that? Does that generate a page? Like, where do you go from there? And then how do you roll it back if you don't have, like, do you just try to merge patch out the diff? Because that definitively won't work in all cases, depending on what's been altered. So without the server-side functionality, I'm not sure if there's a really good way to move forward other than just like unfortunately, look at and see what's changed and then make a human decision about, like, what do I do to move forward? Like, how do I back this guy's stuff out so I can roll forward with the upgrade I actually want?
I mean, probably we'll look at some way to prevent anything that's been created by Helm to be modified manually.
Like mission controller.
You could do that, or, I mean, like, I would say RBAC. Lock that namespace down tight so that nobody else can come in and modify your stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like a,
Yeah.
in a way, you solve that one with process, not with a technical thing. Like, you make it so that people can't do it, and you tell people not to do it, and then when people do it, you go around and flip them on the ear.
So, I mean, like, yeah, so that's the thing, like, but I said use RBAC, but that's actually kind of a flippant answer because I can say that, and that works where I live, but like where he lives, maybe these people do need, like, I mean, you can't RBAC out people who break glass in the events. Yeah, but you can yell at them. That's, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Sometimes the technical solution is so hard, it's so much easier to just have a solution where you say to people, please don't do that, because if you do, I'm going to come around and shout at you, and you're not going to like it. Like, you know, and a lot of the time it'll work surprisingly well.
Yeah. Yep.
Your slide about I thought I saw something about the release resource.
Two of them, I believe, they're release and estate resources are the ones they're thinking of using now, and then potentially the app CRD as well. But the release and state resources are the only things that they're going to use, and I believe they're going to be CRDs at this point. And remember, everything up here, which we'll also reintroduce at the intro, is still somewhat speculative. Like your best bet, and at the intro we'll give these slides out which have the links to the current ongoing work on Helm 3. You can go and check out what's actually in flight there and the status of all the proposals and the open issues. And much like the rest of Kubernetes, you are always welcome to leave comments and say, no, stop that, it's broken, that's not going to work for me, have you thought about this? And the Helm guys, like most of the Kubernetes core contributors, are always willing to listen. So are we at time, or do we have time for like one more question? Yeah, we'll take one more, okay.
So, what are the companies that are, who are the companies that are financing people who work on the official charts? Is anybody getting paid to make sure that this?
No, I don't know. I can't actually answer that. I mean, like, so we have people on so there are people on my team specific who are Helm chart maintainers, and so, I mean, Google is to some extent, like, but I mean, what Anna contributes has been a lot of like developing the test automation infrastructure, turning that up inside of Prow, making sure we actually have tests for all the charts. And it's really been something that's been more of a contribution to SIG Apps, like building those tests and owning them and using them to ensure that we haven't modified the Workloads API in such a way that it breaks Helm and all the charts prior to release. I don't think we actually count them as release blocking, but we've been really good at keeping our test screen. So he's done that.
Are you guys using Helm daily?
Who, us?
You guys.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Gee. I mean, like I use it from time to time, but it's not like, I mainly work in the cluster, not on it so much. When we dog food, we tend not to use Helm as the dog food. But I mean, it is obviously a popular way for, so there are people who run on Google who do use Helm, right? And, you know, so SIG Apps I want Helm to work well for anybody in any cloud on top of Kubernetes. Google hat on, I want it especially to work well on GKE for people who are running their workloads in my house. And again, Helm hat on, like the entire thing was, it was something that people came together and like, how can we add value to this community? How can I manage packages better? So I think everybody who's a participant in the community is really just looking to make your lives easier. And, there's a lot of opinions on the right way to do packaging. There are hooks in Helm 2, and they're trying to put hooks in Helm 3 to make it easier to be more opinionated personally and to turn up infrastructure that's a modification that leverages the existing Helm infrastructure in order to add value to your cluster. So there's that. All right, so I got the official wrap it up box. All right, we'll move downstairs if anybody's interested in continuing the conversation. Thanks for showing up, everybody.